May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Please be seated. So we may have to take some pauses as we have some interruptions. Remember, we pause in prayer for those driving the vehicles, those they're rushing to help, those who are first responders, and all those who help. So I heard all about the great party you guys had last Sunday. It sounded just amazing. All of the people who helped, I know Debbie Venancio and Vicki Hicks put together this wonderful distance coffee hour, making treats to put in little bags, and Susan Barnes and Posey Jackson led a rousing discussion that celebrated the spiritual gifts of this community, which are considerable. And thanks to all of you who participated, all of you who came, all of you who joined in that discussion for a great day. Yesterday, your vestry participated in a mini retreat, an at-home retreat, right here in the Guild Room, fully masked up, to reflect on our spiritual gifts and to reflect and implement the work we did in July at our vestry retreat. We use this time to plan and figure out how we'll manage our shared goals for ministry over the next year. So what is a shared goal for ministry, you might ask? Well, I'm so glad you did. I know I heard that question. What is a shared goal for ministry? In our July retreat, we met and we had we listed out all of the many things that a church does. Things like pastoral care, stewardship, outreach, worship, music, building and grounds, I'm forgetting things, education, all those details. And so we listed all of those different functions of a church, and each of the vestry members had 3 little Post-its with a 1 and a 2 and a 3 written on them. And we all placed our first choice on the thing we thought was most important that the church did, and then the second and the third. And then we found the clusters where the highest numbers of 1s, first priorities were, highest number of 2s, and highest numbers of 3s, to develop our ministry priorities. And then we figured out what they were, and this is what turned out. Worship is Emmanuel's highest priority. Outreach was second. Stewardship was third, and management and buildings were tied. So we made them a combined 4th. This is how we're going to allocate our resources, our spiritual gifts, our financial gifts, our beautiful building asset gifts, and our time for this next year. Then we listed all of the tasks that go into each of those categories. And there are a lot of them, as you might imagine. Let's just take worship for an example. There are some hidden things about worship. For example, how long does it take to launder and prepare the fair linens? We have to account for the altar guild's gift of time. Then we have to think of the lectors and the intercessors and the ushers and the acolytes and the greeters. We have to plan whether we'll be indoors or out, prepare the bulletin, choose and arrange for music, write for the prayers, prepare a sermon. And tasks like that go into each of the priorities. So these are our goals for our ministry priorities. And yesterday in the follow-up vestry retreat, we worked to plan how each of us would participate in accomplishing those goals for our shared ministry. We listed all of the tasks, and then we tried to figure out, how do we allocate those hours, the hours of clergy, staff, and volunteer time? How do we allocate those hours to serve and advance our goals? What tasks have to be done by priest or staff? What tasks can be done by someone else? What tasks need to be done? Maybe some don't need to be done at all. Does each task have to be done in the same way it's been done before? Because when we have a common view of what we're trying to do and who we're trying to be, we can all enjoy a great sense of accomplishment as we come together in our ministry. We can set our priorities for all of our resources, including our spiritual gifts. It's really tough to pick what's most important when everything we do in community is so good and we only just want more of it. And as Dave Monroe so wisely said yesterday, we can have anything we want. We just can't have everything we want. And that's part of the joy and challenge of being in a community of disciples, followers of Jesus. Just look at the conversations that Jesus and the disciples have been having over the past 2 weeks in Mark's gospel. In last week's gospel, Jesus tells the disciples for the first time where their earthly ministry of preaching and teaching and healing is headed. He'll undergo great suffering, Jesus tells them. He'll be rejected by his own society's infrastructure, the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes. He'll be killed, Jesus tells them, and after 3 days he'll rise again. As Mark's gospel tells us, he said all this quite open, that he believes he's the Messiah. Peter is Jesus' ride-along, his best friend, his best bud. And he is rebuking, and that's biblical English for chastising, sternly correcting Jesus. This is the same Peter who was so moved by Jesus' transfiguration on Mount Tabor that he wants to get out and draw architectural plans for houses for Elijah and Moses and for Jesus to live up there. This is the same Peter who gets so excited when he sees Jesus on the beach post-resurrection that he takes off all his clothes and jumps in the water and swims to shore when everybody else is riding in the boat and probably gets there first. Peter stands in here and in all these places for all of us. He asks the questions that we're all thinking, but don't dare ask. Say it isn't so, Jesus. We want it to be the way we remember it. Fishing, casting out demons, healing people. Good times. And then in today's reading, we see all this play out again. Jesus and the disciples had walked all the way back to Capernaum from Caesarea Philippi. It's probably about a 2-day walk down through the mountains. The Upper Galilee is the region around the Roman outpost of Caesarea Philippi. But what's really going on at Caesarea Philippi is it was built there because of the pagan springs that are right steps away from there. It's called today Banias Springs, which is a rough translation as the springs of Pan, the pagan god, half goat, half man, that was the pagan god of life. And it is a beautiful natural area where the springs that ultimately become the Jordan River come up cool and clear from the ground, and they spill over these ancient dams down into the river that joins with the Dan River and becomes the Jordan that runs down through the Great Rift Valley. And so they're up there taking a break, getting away from the dailies of their ministry to plan how their shared ministry will go. They're in a retreat, a vestry retreat. And so they're up there at that time, and that today's gospel, they've come down from that place where they had retreated, and they're still teaching. Jesus is still teaching and preaching. And they come back through the Upper Galilee to the Lower Galilee, and they haven't yet reached Capernaum, where today's gospel takes place. Jesus is teaching as he walks. Remember, the gospel says he doesn't want anybody to see them because he's really focused on his message with the disciples. And as they walk, he teaches, and they're avoiding crowds, and he tells them, the Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him, and 3 days after being killed, he will rise again. And the disciples are absolutely still confounded by this message. But this time, instead of rebuking Jesus, which really does seem quite daring, even for Peter, the disciples are just silent. As Matthew's gospel says, they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. So instead, they distracted themselves with a sideline discussion, arguing among themselves as they walk about which one of them is the greatest. Of course, Jesus knows they're not listening and questions them about what they were arguing about on the way. And Matthew's gospel doesn't say what it is, but Matthew's gospel says, Jesus doesn't say what it is, but Matthew's gospel tells us that the disciples are squabbling among themselves about which is the greatest. Peter rebuked Jesus in Caesarea Philippi, and now presumably Peter, as well as the other disciples, are arguing among themselves about which is the greatest. So what's going on here? My sister calls these rough spots in family and friend relations famdamily. When we're having a tough time understanding and getting along with those we're the very closest to. What Peter is wrestling with on a grand scale is what we all wrestle with in the community closest to our heart. We want what we love to stay the same. And Jesus' response to his best buddy, Peter, and to us listening in now, speaks of their familiarity in their relationship. He says up in Caesarea Philippi, "Get behind me, Satan," adopting Peter's own tone with his friend. Is Jesus really calling Peter the devil? Maybe, but I don't think so. He's being firm and straight with this beloved member of his own family. And in today's gospel, when they're all in Capernaum, they have been distracting themselves from the real challenges of living together in community with office staffing and leadership issues. Which one is the greatest? Jesus' message is firm and tender again. He reminds us that our focus should be on the least of these, the children, and not the greatest of these, no matter which one of us might be or how great that is. And Jesus knew that this was hard, and that's why he taught tenderly and emphatically. Into a conversation about which was the greatest, he invited and embraced a little child. And your vestry is striving to live by Jesus' example as we imagine and dream our goals for shared ministry in this beloved community of Emmanuel. Not beginning with the business and administrative end of the discussion, but with worship, outreach, and stewardship, embracing the least of these. Amen.